He slid the paper across the kitchen table. The same table where I had fed our mother her oatmeal every morning for 7 years. And he said it the way a man reads a weather report. It is not personal. Della, the house is an asset now. You've got until the 1st. 7 years. I kept that woman alive in that house. I bathed her. I crushed her pills into applesauce when she stopped. Trusting spoons. I walked her back to bed at 3 in the morning. The nights she stood in the hallway, asking a stranger where her daughter went. I never took $1 for it. What my brother didn't say, sliding that paper at me, was that the house wasn't his to sell. He had quietly turned it into a $96,000 credit line. Using a power of attorney, our mother supposedly signed on the 4th of March, a day she was locked behind a keypad door, in a memory care ward, 11 miles away. Calling the nurses by my name. Here is the part he forgot. I read paperwork for a living. I am a healthcare fraud auditor. I catch people who forge signatures and bill insurance for the dead. Last winter, alone at that same table, with the porch light still burning, because she always made me leave it on, I finally read his. So when he told me it was just paperwork, I let him believe that. Calm, as a man could be. Because the most patient thing in that house was about to become the thing that took everything back. My name is Della Marsh. I am 41 years old, and if you've ever been the one who stayed, the one who carried the weight while everyone else carried opinions, then I need you to stay with me, because the people who don't show up to lift the load are always the first ones at the reading of the will. Let me take you back to the morning he handed me that paper, because that is where you'll understand what kind of man slides an eviction. Across the table you raised your hand to feed at. It was a Tuesday in October. I remember because Tuesday was the day I changed our mother's bedding, and the day the home supply truck dropped off her briefs and her thickening powder for her water, so she wouldn't choke. I had her settled in the recliner by the window, where she liked to watch the live oaks move. Her name is Eleanor. Everybody called her Nell. By that October, she didn't answer to either most days, but she'd turn her head if you hummed the hymn she used to sing, doing dishes. My brother Wade came in without warning, the way he always did, like he still lived there. He was 38 then, and he wore the kind of soft quarter-zip pullover that men wear when they want you to think they manage money for a living. He did. Sort of. He'd had a franchise. We'll get to the franchise. He had a folder. He set it on the table next to Mother's cold tea, and he smiled at her first. Hey, Mama. She didn't look at him. He'd visited maybe 9 times in 7 years. And 3 of those were to ask me for something. Then he slid the paper across to me, and he said the thing about the house being an asset, and that I had until the 1st. I picked it up, a notice to vacate, my name on it, the address that had been my address since I moved back in to nurse our father through his last spring, and just never left, because then it was Mother, and there was no one else who would. I read it the way I read everything now, slowly, looking for the part people hope you'll skip. And there it was, in the 3rd paragraph. The property at 214 Coralbean Lane was encumbered by a lien, a loan, against a house our parents had paid off before I was out of high school. I kept my face still. That is a thing I learned at work, and a thing I learned at this table. You don't show the animal you are afraid. You breathe slow, and you let them come to you. Where did the loan come from? Wade. It is just paperwork, Della. He said it gently, like he was explaining a tax form to a child. Mom signed everything over to me back in the spring. so I could handle her affairs. It is actually a kindness. You've been carrying her too long. It is time to get her somewhere with real care. Somewhere with real care. While the woman who'd showered her and tracked her seizures and learned to read the difference between a urinary infection and a bad afternoon sat 6 feet away in a chair I'd bought with my own money, I said, "Okay, just that." He took it as a win. He patted the table twice, told me he'd send the realtor's name, and he left. Then I sat there with my mother and a notice to vacate, and I did what I have done every single night. For 7 years, I opened the green notebook. Remember, the green notebook. It is going to matter more than anything else in this story. The green notebook was a child's composition book with a marbled cover, and it held every day of our mother's decline in my handwriting. Every dose, every meal she finished, and every one she pushed away. Every fall, every doctor's visit, every night she didn't sleep. I started it because the neurologist asked me to track her sundowning. And I kept it because numbers were the only thing in that house that never lied to me. I'd been an accountant once, in another life before the work I do now. Before all of it, I was a girl who balanced our mother's checkbook at the kitchen table, while she worked a double at the cannery. Reading a ledger is the first language I ever learned. That Tuesday night, I turned to the spring, to March, and I want you to remember what I found, because the whole thing turns on it. The first 9 days of March, there was a single line repeated, day after day, in my own pen. St. Agnes, respite. I had put my mother into a respite, stay at St. Agnes Memory Care, from the 1st of March to the 9th. I'd done it because I had pneumonia and could not lift her, and because for once in 7 years I let myself rest. I have the admission paperwork. I have the discharge summary. I have a photograph I took of her in the day room there on the 4th, holding a foam cup, because she'd smiled at a cardinal outside the window, and I wanted to keep it. The 4th of March. The exact day a power of attorney across town said she sat in a notary's office of sound mind and signed my brother control of her entire life. She was behind a locked door, 11 miles away, in a building she could not leave. On the day, the ink says she signed. I closed the notebook. I didn't cry. Not yet. I want to be honest with you about that, because this is the only time in the whole story I am going to. And I'd rather you trust me when it comes. I just sat very still and listened to my mother breathe. And I understood that the rest of my life had just been divided into, before this page, and after it. If you've ever held a piece of paper that quietly rearranged everything you thought was true about your own family, you know the particular silence. I mean, let me tell you who these people were before they were villains, because the prompt my whole life followed was that they were family. And family doesn't do this. That belief is the door they walked through. I grew up the older of two, in the low country, in a town called Hayward's Bluff, where the marsh comes right up to the backyards, and the heat sits on you like a hand. Our father, Bill Marsh, ran a crew that maintained the lift bridges along the coast. Our mother worked the line at a seafood cannery for 26 years, the kind of work that takes your fingerprints and your shoulders and gives you a pension that doesn't quite reach. They bought the house on Coral Bean Lane the year I was 9 and paid it off the year I turned 20. And that house was the single proudest fact of their lives. Paid for. Theirs. A thing nobody could take. Wade came 4 years after me, and he came easy, the way second children do when the first one already learned to be careful, so the parents could exhale. I was the one who read the bills. Wade was the one who could make our mother laugh until she had to sit down. People loved Wade on sight and kept loving him long past the point where the evidence said they should. He had what our father called a salesman's weather. Sunny, right up until it wasn't. He married Brooke when he was 29. Brooke was sharp in a way Wade wasn't. Sharp like a good knife is sharp, useful, and a little frightening. She kept the books for his businesses, and there were several. A supplement company, a short stint flipping a duplex, and then the one that broke them. A franchise, a chain of express car washes called a name I won't give you, where you buy the territory and the equipment and the branding for a number with a lot of zeros, and you pray the cars come. The cars did not come. By the spring, everything happened. Marsh Holdings, limited liability company, owed more than it would ever earn, and Wade was the kind of underwater where a man starts looking around the family for something he can reach. I want to be fair to him, because the villain in a story like this is never a cartoon. Wade was not a monster who woke up wanting to rob his mother. Wade was a man who had quietly failed, who could not say the word failed out loud, and who had spent his whole life being forgiven the second. He smiled. The cruelty wasn't in his heart. It was in his arithmetic. He looked at a paid-off house and a mother who could no longer count, and he did the math, and the math came out in his favor, and that was all the permission he ever needed. Brooke did a different math. I'll show you hers later. Hold the word. Checklist. And then there was the rest of them. The aunts, the cousins, the chorus, my mother's sister, Aunt Carolyn, who believed above all earthly things that family business stays in the family, and that the worst thing a person could do was make a scene. When the time came, Aunt Carolyn would look at me across a folding table and call me selfish for the crime of telling the truth out loud. Remember her too. She comes back around, smaller and sorrier. But she comes back around. Stay with me, because here is where the trap was built, and I didn't feel a single tooth of it close. Our father died first. 6 years. Before that, October, his heart on the lift bridge over the Coosaw on a Sunday. After the funeral, I stayed in the house to help Mother, and within a year she started losing things. Not keys. Words. Words. Then names. Then the thread of a morning. The neurologist, Dr. Asifi, said early onset. Said it would move faster than we wanted. Said she'd need someone. There was no money for a facility that didn't make me sick to walk into. So there was me. I gave up the apartment. I gave up, for a while, the man I'd been seeing. I kept my job because I had to eat, and I learned to work the kind of hours where you audit fraud claims by day and change an adult diaper at midnight, and you stop being able to remember the last whole meal you finished sitting down. And here is the thing I need you to hear, because it is the engine of everything that came after. While I did that, Wade and Brooke came twice a year and brought a pie and left within 90 minutes and told everyone at church that the family was all pulling together for Nell. And everyone believed them, because Wade had a salesman's weather, and I had circles under my eyes and no time to defend myself. About a year before the notice, Wade started coming around a little more. I should have read it. I read fraud for a living, and I missed it in my own house. The way the cobbler's children go barefoot. He'd come and sit with Mother an hour and ask me soft questions. How is she doing? Really, is she lucid much? Does she still recognize people? Did Dad and Mom ever do a will? Do you know? Have you ever seen one? I thought he was finally being a son. I told him everything. I told him she had good mornings and lost afternoons. I told him I'd never found a will, that our parents weren't will, people, that the house would just pass to the two of us. Surely, whenever the day came, I handed him the map and called it conversation. One afternoon, Brooke was with him, and she was on the porch on her phone, and I heard her say to someone, "No, Cyrus can do it. He is family, he doesn't even charge." I didn't think one thing about it. Cyrus. Highwes. Hold that name too. I am sorry to ask you to hold so many things. That is how these schemes work. None of the pieces look like anything until they're sitting next to each other. Here is the part where the floor gave way. And I didn't even hear it. That first week of March, when I had pneumonia and put Mother into respite at St. Agnes, Wade called me. Warm as soup. "Della, you sound terrible. Listen. Don't worry about a thing on the mom side. You just rest. Brooke and I will handle anything that comes up." I remember being grateful. I remember thinking, finally, he is stepping up. I thanked him. I told you. I'd be honest. I thanked the man who was, that very week, walking my incapacitated mother's name onto documents. She could not have understood if you'd read them to her slowly, while I lay in bed with a fever, breaking. Here is what they did. And I only know the order now because I reconstructed it later. Page by page, the way I reconstruct. A fraud claim at work. On the 4th of March, a durable power of attorney was signed, granting Wade Marsh full authority over the person and the estate of Eleanor Marsh. It was notarized by a man named Cyrus Tubb. Cyrus, it turned out, was Brooke's cousin. And here is the first crack, the one I'd find with a free public search any citizen can do. Cyrus Tubbs' notary commission had expired on the 28th of February. He stamped a document on the 4th of March, with a seal that had died 4 days earlier. A notarization by an expired commission isn't a small foul. It is void. It is nothing. It is a man pressing a dead stamp onto a lie. And the woman whose hand supposedly signed it was, on the 4th of March, in a foam-floored day room at St. Agnes, holding a cup, watching a cardinal 11 miles from that notary's office. Behind a door that takes a 4-digit code to open. On the 22nd of March, using that void power of attorney, Wade opened a home equity line of credit against the house on Coralbian Lane, a credit line with a limit of $96,000, secured by a lien recorded at the county courthouse, a public record, which means it was sitting there in the open the whole time, waiting for someone who knew how to read it. He drew $60,000 off it before anyone froze a thing. I'd trace every dollar later. For now, hold the round number, $60,000 pulled out of the walls of the only house our parents ever owned, while their daughter slept off a fever in the back bedroom, and their other child told the whole town he was handling things. That is the trap. It closed in March. I didn't find it until October. 7 months, I lived inside a robbery and poured my mother's evening pills, and never knew the ground was already gone. Now let me tell you about the one person in all of this who saw me. Because there is always one, and you remember their voice for the rest of your life. Her name was Marguerite Okafor. Everybody called her Margie. I met her at a caregivers support group I went to exactly twice, in the basement of a Methodist church, because the social worker said I had to talk to someone, or I'd come apart. Margie had nursed her own husband through 9 years of the same disease. Our mother had. She was 70, built small and certain. With reading glasses, she wore on a beaded chain and a way of looking at you that made you feel weighed and not found wanting. The second night, I told the group the polite version of my life. That I was tired, that my brother helped when he could, and afterward, by the coffee, Margie took my wrist. She didn't squeeze it. She just held it. The way you'd hold something you didn't want to drop. Baby, she said, I am going to tell you something my mother told me, and you can hate it tonight and thank me later. She looked right into me. The ones who don't carry the weight always show up for the reading. Watch. Who is in the room? When the load is heavy, that is your family. Everybody else is just relatives. The ones who carry the weight, and everybody else is just relatives. I have repeated that sentence to myself more times than I have repeated any prayer. I didn't thank her that night. I drove home and let her line sit in me, like a stone in a shoe. But she'd named the thing I couldn't, and months later, at a folding table, with my whole family watching, I would find out exactly who'd been in the room when the load was heavy. Spoiler, it was me. It had always been me. I want to be careful here not to turn the next stretch into a diary, because the truth is the next part of my life was mostly survival. And survival is boring to live and worse to listen to. So let me give it to you fast, the way it actually felt. Like one long-held breath, the years before the betrayal, compressed. I learned to hang a feeding schedule on the refrigerator and a fall risk checklist on the bathroom door. I learned which pharmacy delivered. I learned to audit insurance fraud on a laptop balanced on my knees in a hospital waiting room, while a resident decided whether mother's confusion was a stroke or just a Tuesday. I learned to forge nothing and document everything, because the green notebook was my religion. I learned the porch light. Mother, even deep into the fog, would get agitated at dusk and pat the table and say, "Leave the light on, leave the light on," over and over until I went and turned on the porch light. And then she'd settle because some old wire in her still believed that a lit porch meant her people were coming home. So every evening of those years, the first thing I did when the sky went pink was turn on that light. For her. For nobody. It cost me nothing, and it bought her peace. And I never once thought of it as anything but a small, sad habit. Hold the porch light. It comes back. Changed. That is the rebuild, or really the holding pattern. Years of showing up at 6 in the morning and doing the ugly work nobody wanted. The way you do when love and duty have braided so tight, you can't find the seam. I wasn't transforming. I was enduring. The transformation came in October, on a Tuesday, when a notice slid across a table and the enduring finally had somewhere to go. So, back to that night, and the green notebook open to March, and the impossible date staring up at me. I made myself a cup of coffee I didn't drink, and I got methodical. Because methodical is the only thing that has ever saved me. I am going to walk you through exactly how I built it, because I want you to see there was no luck in it. No conference line, left on by accident. No glitch. No secret hacker cousin. Just a woman who reads documents for a living, reading the documents in the open, the way the law lets any citizen do. First, the date. I laid them side by side on the table. The respite admission paper from St. Agnes, dated the 1st of March, the discharge, dated the 9th, the photograph, time-stamped the 4th, and a copy of the power of attorney, which I'd pulled, and this matters, from the county recorder's public office, where Wade had recorded it himself to make the lien stick. He'd filed his own evidence into a public drawer, because he never imagined anyone in his family could read a drawer. The power of attorney, said the 4th of March. My mother said, with a foam cup and a cardinal. The 4th of March, 11 miles away, behind a locked door. Both could not be true. Second, the stamp, the notary block named Cyrus Tubb, and gave his commission number. I went to the Secretary of State's notary lookup, a free public search, the kind you can do from your phone in a parking lot. And I typed in the number. Commission expired the 28th of February. The seal on my mother's signature was 4 days dead when it touched the page. Third, the lien, the recorded deed of trust at the courthouse. Public, dated the 22nd of March, securing a $96,000 credit line against 214 Coral Bean Lane. Signed, Wade Marsh, attorney-in-fact for Eleanor Marsh. Built on a void power, sworn by a dead stamp. Dated to a day my mother was locked away. 3 threads. None of them mine to invent. All of them his own acts, sitting in the open, waiting. But I knew the difference between this looks wrong and this is provable. Because proving it is literally my job, and I knew the one thing I did not have yet, and could not get by myself, and must not try to get the wrong way. I did not have the bank's loan file. I did not have the money trail. And I was not, under any circumstance, going to pull a single string at my own workplace to get them. I need to stop and tell you that, plainly, because it is the spine of this whole thing. I investigate fraud for an insurance company's special unit. I had, sitting at my fingertips at work, tools that could have told me in an afternoon where every dollar went, and I did not touch one of them. Not one. A colleague even offered, once he heard the shape of it, Della, I could just run a quick, and I stopped him, numb. Ipausen. This one, we do clean, because here is the truth. Margie didn't say but lived. You do not beat a man who broke the rules by breaking the rules. You beat him by following them so perfectly that there is no crack for him to climb out of. Wade's whole life was the assumption that the rules were for other people. The way I was going to take everything back was to become the rules. If you've ever wanted to win the fast, dirty way, and made yourself wait for the slow, clean way instead, comment stayed. I mean it. Type it down below, because I need to know I am not the only one who chose the harder road on purpose. I'll come back to why in a minute. So I did it the slow, clean way. The next morning, I called an elder law attorney named Sandra Pell, whose name Margie's group had passed around like a secret. Sandra had silver hair cut short and a voice with no wasted motion. I sat across from her with my folder, and I laid it out the way I'd lay out a fraud file at work. Date, document, contradiction. She read for a long time. Then, she set down her glasses. Miss Marsh, she said, I want to be careful with you, because I see a lot of families, and most of the time the truth is a gray smear. This is not gray. She tapped the respite photograph. Your mother was incapacitated and physically elsewhere on the date of execution. The notarization is void on its face. The lien is therefore voidable, and the moving of her money under a void instrument is, in this state, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. That is a felony. Do you understand what you are holding? I think so. I said, you are holding the whole thing. She said, now here is how we do it without breaking anything ourselves. Because if you march over to his door and scream, you hand him the story that you are hysterical. And he is the calm one. We don't give him that. We do it. In order, and she gave me the order, and I am going to give it to you. Because the order is the catharsis. The order is the whole reason it landed. 1. We file a report with Adult Protective Services. Not me alone, showing up at his door. A formal report on the record that triggers a state investigation of the exploitation. Sandra would help me write it. So it was airtight and unemotional. Facts only. 2. We petition the court for emergency temporary guardianship and conservatorship of my mother. Because the instant a judge appoints me, the void power of attorney is suspended, and Wade's authority over her person and her money evaporates by order. Not by argument. 3. Once I am appointed, I, lawfully, as her conservator, the only person with the legal right to do it, go to the bank and dispute the credit line and the drained accounts as fraud and demand a loan file. Then, and only then, the money trail opens. Not because I sneaked. Because the law put the key in my hand. 4. And by me, we let the criminal side run on its own track. The Adult Protective Services finding goes to the Sheriff's Economic Crimes Unit. The sheriff goes to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor decides. I don't chase a charge. I build a file so clean that the charge chases itself. It will take some weeks, Sandra said. Maybe a couple of months. He'll feel it tightening. Before he understands it, can you live in that house with him thinking he is one? And say nothing for 2 months. I thought about 7 years of saying nothing, while he took credit at church. Yes, I said, I am good at that part. That is where it changed. Stay with me, because from here the ground starts moving under his feet. And he can't tell which step did it. I filed the Adult Protective Services report on a Thursday. Russ Dolan was the investigator they assigned. A heavy-set man with kind, tired eyes, who'd clearly seen every flavor of this. He came to the house, met my mother, watched her not know what day or year or president it was. Watched her call me by her own dead sister's name. And then, a minute later, pat my hand and say, there is my good girl, which was as close as she got anymore to knowing me. Russ wrote it all down. He looked at the respite photo and the expired commission and the recorded lien, and he was quiet a moment. And then, he said the line I think about. Ma'am, you've already done about 80% of my job. Most folks bring me a feeling. You brought me a case. The guardianship petition went in the following week. Sandra warned me Wade would be served notice. He had a right to contest, and that he would. Because men like him always believe the smile will still work. In a courtroom, he was served on a Monday. He called me. Monday night, I let it go to voicemail, and I listened standing at the window, with the porch light on. Della, what is this? What did you do? You filed something. On me. Call me back. This is. You are tearing this family apart. You understand that? Over a house. Mom would be ashamed. Call me back. I did not call him back. I'd waited 7 years for him to call me back about anything. He could sit in it. Tuesday. The calls came faster, then the texts, long ones. The early ones angry. The later ones turning oily and warm again, because he could feel the charm wasn't catching, and he was reaching for an older setting. Let's just talk. We're family. I'll explain everything. There is context here you don't have. There was no context I didn't have. I had all of it, in a beige folder, In date order. Wednesday, Aunt Carolyn called. And that one I picked up, because Aunt Carolyn was old and I loved her, and I owed her a voice. She was crying before I said hello. Della, baby. Wade called me beside himself. You've got the law involved. In a family matter. Whatever happened between you two. You don't put your own brother in a courtroom. That is not how we were raised. You are being, and there it was. The word, the one that is probably in the title of why you clicked on this. You are being selfish, honey. You are letting your hurt make you selfish. Selfish. I want you to sit in that word with me for a second, because if you've ever been called it for the crime of finally protecting yourself, you know, it lands somewhere, a punch, can't reach. That night, after I hung up with Aunt Carolyn, I did a piece of arithmetic I'd never let myself do, because I am an auditor, and sometimes you have to put a number on a thing to see its true size. A home health aide in our county runs about $22 an hour. I worked on the easy weeks, 60 hours. 60 hours a week, 52 weeks a year. For 7 years is 21,840 hours. At $22 an hour, that is $480,480 of care that I gave my mother for free, nearly $500,000 of labor. And my brother stood in church and called me the freeloader living in Mom's house. I never sent anyone a bill. I am only doing the math now, so you understand exactly who was reaching into whose pocket. I didn't argue with her. Sandra had told me, don't argue, inform, and only when the table's set. So I just said, Aunt Carolyn, I love you. I'm going to ask you to come to a family meeting at the house on the 20th, and I am going to show you something. And then you can decide for yourself who is being selfish. Will you come? She said she'd come. She thought she was coming to talk sense into me. She was coming to a reckoning. Because that is the thing. And Sandra and I had planned it on purpose. Wade had spent 7 months and a lifetime telling the family his version. If I let the law quietly do its work in a courthouse, his version stayed the family story forever. Mom thinks Della overreacted. Aunt Carolyn thinks the girls had a spat. And worse, a man who gets away with it once does it again. To the next account he can reach, the next aunt, the next dimming mind. I'd watched enough fraud files to know that exploitation isn't a moment. It is an appetite. If I didn't show them the truth, in the open, with the documents on the table, then I hadn't stopped anything. I just survived it. And I was done surviving things. So, I called the meeting. I told Wade himself, in a flat text that gave him nothing to argue with. Family meeting at Mom's house, Saturday, the 20th, 4 p.m. Aunt Carolyn, Brooke, you. There are things everyone should see. D. He texted back within a minute. 3 messages. The bravado already cracking under it. Finally. Yes. Why, let's clear the air. He thought I was folding. He thought he'd talk his way through it, like he'd talked his way through everything, since he was 4 years old, and could make our mother laugh until she forgot what she'd told him not to do. Between the petition and the meeting, the court moved. Sandra called me on a Friday with the first of what I'll call the verdicts landing. And I am going to give you these in the flat way they actually arrived. Because the flatness is the point. Cold revenge doesn't shout. It files. The judge granted emergency temporary guardianship and conservatorship to me. pending a full hearing, and the order. I have it. I've read it more times than is healthy, included a written finding. It found that the durable power of attorney dated the 4th of March was of no force or effect, that the principal lacked capacity and was not present, and that all authority purportedly granted thereunder was suspended immediately. Of no force or effect. 7 words. The whole structure Wade had built, every dollar he'd moved, was now standing on a power the court had just declared was never there. The floor he'd dropped me through. The judge dropped out from under him with a sentence. I read that order alone. In my car, in the parking lot of Sundra's office, and that is the once. That is the only time I cried in this whole story. And I am telling you exactly where it was. So you'll know I held the line everywhere else. I sat in a parked car with a piece of paper that said of no force or effect. And I cried so hard I had to wait 20 minutes before I could drive. And not one bit of it was sadness. It was the sound a body makes when it finally gets to set down something it has been carrying for 7 years and didn't know it could ever put down. Then I wiped my face and I drove to the bank because now I was her conservator. Now the key was in my hand, lawfully. Now I could open the door. I'd refuse to pick. I want to walk you slowly through what was behind that door, because this was the high page, the one where I sat across from a fraud specialist at the bank. Her name was Priya, and she did at her bank exactly what I do at mine. So we spoke the same language, and we opened the loan file together. Page by page, and the stakes climbed with everyone. Page 1. The credit line application. It listed my mother's income as rental and investment income, $62,000 a year. My mother's income was a cannery pension and Social Security that together didn't clear 30. The number was invented to qualify a house. For a loan its owner could never carry. False statement on a loan application. Priya made a small mark. Page 2. The signature page. Wade Marsh, attorney in fact. And behind it, the same notary block. The same Cyrus tub. The same dead commission. Priya pulled the commission status herself, right there, and went very still. This isn't valid, she said quietly. This loan was secured on an invalid instrument. Another mark. Page 3 was the draw history. And this is where my stomach did the thing it does at work. When a number stops being a number and starts being a person's life, $60,000 drawn down in the weeks after origination. And I traced it the way I trace everything. And it split 3 ways. And the 3 ways tell you everything about who my brother actually was under the salesman's weather. $32,000 went to Marsh Holdings, limited liability company, the car wash franchise that was already drowning, a hole he was pouring my mother's house into to keep his own failure from being visible for 1 more quarter. $18,000 went to a brokerage account, and the brokerage statements showed it gone inside 6 weeks. Options, the kind of bets that aren't investing. They're gambling that learned to wear a tie. He didn't lose our mother's house at a card table. He lost it on a screen, which is somehow worse, because at least a card table makes you leave the house. And $10,000 came out as cashier's checks. Cash. Basically, no trail past the counter. People you pay in cash are people you owe in the kind of way you don't want recorded. 32 and 18 and 10, $60,000. I did the arithmetic 3 times the way I always do. And it closed to the dollar, and I sat with it. $60,000 off the walls of a paid-for house, and not 1 cent of it for my mother's care. Not 1 cent for the briefs or the thickening powder or the locked door respite. Not 1 cent for the daughter who'd given up her whole life. All of it poured into a failing car wash, and a screen full of losing bets, and a stack of checks, made out to people he was afraid of. There was one more drain, separate from the credit line. Using the same void power, Wade had cashed out a small certificate of deposit our mother had kept since the cannery days. $14,000. Her funeral money, the money she'd set aside, so the kids wouldn't have to worry when the time came. Gone in February, which told me the franchise hole had opened the door, and the house was just where it went next. I had it all now. Every page. Iced one, and not one page had I obtained by cheating. The public records, he filed himself. The free notary lookup, my own caregiving notebook, and respite papers. And the loan file, opened lawfully, because a judge had made me the only person with the right to open it. The whole case was airtight precisely because I'd refused every shortcut. Margie's slow, clean road. It cost me 2 months of silence, and it bought me a thing nobody could ever tear down. That is when I put together the folder, a real one. Beige, tabbed. The way I build them at work. Tab 1, the respite admission, discharge, and the time-stamped photograph. Tab 2, the recorded power of attorney with the 4th of March date. Beside the notary commission printout, showing the seal expired on the 28th of February. Tab 3, the recorded lien. Tab 4, the loan application with the invented income, the draw history, and my tracing of the $60,000 into the franchise, the brokerage, and the cash. Tab 5, the certificate of deposit cash out. Tab 6, the guardianship order with its 7 words underlined, of no force or effect. And tab 7, the last one, the one I almost left out. A single page in Brooke's handwriting. I told you to hold the word checklist. Here is where it pays. 2 weeks before the meeting, Brooke had come by the house with a folder of papers for Della to sign. A quitclaim, it turned out, that would have had me hand over any interest in the house. Smiling voluntarily, which tells you they knew their own paper was rotten, or they wouldn't have needed mine. She left the folder on my kitchen counter. In my house, where I live, and when I opened it, which I had every right to do, it was sitting in my own kitchen. Paper clipped behind the quitclaim was a page Brooke had clearly never meant to leave. Her own handwriting. A to-do list. It said, power of attorney. Done. Cyrus. Credit line. Pending. Cash. The certificate first. List house. With Tara. Get Della out by the 1st. Don't say gambling to Carolyn. Don't say gambling to Carolyn. That line did something to me that the $60,000 hadn't, because it meant they knew. It meant this wasn't Wade, flailing and Brooke looking away. Brooke had scouted it, sequenced it, kept the order, knew the word for what Wade really was, and knew to keep that word away from the family's ears. The certificate first, then the house, then me out the door, and a script for managing the aunt. It was a project plan. My mother's life was a project plan. With bullet points. Sandra slid that page into the file and looked at me. This, she said, is no longer just exploitation. With this, the prosecutor has conspiracy. I drove home and turned on the porch light and stood in the kitchen a long time. Then I made my mother's oatmeal because it was morning somewhere in her, and I fed her at the table and I did not tell her any of it. Because some mercies you keep, the meeting. And my ting, the 20th, 4 p.m. I am going to take you into the room, because this is the part you came for. And I promise you, it does not involve me raising my voice one time. Cold. Doesn't need volume. I said it at the house, at the kitchen table. The same table, always the same table. Because I wanted it to happen, where the oatmeal happened, where the notice slid across, where the green notebook lived. Aunt Carolyn came early, fragile, and ready to referee, with a casserole, because she didn't know what else to bring to a fight. Wade and Brooke came at 4 exactly. Wade in the soft pullover, wearing the salesman's weather, already talking before he was through the door about how glad he was we could finally sit down like adults. Brooke said nothing and watched my face the way I watch a claim. My mother was in her chair, by the window. I'd timed her afternoon medication, so she'd be calm and present in the way she could still be present. I needed her in the room, not to perform, just to be the truth that the paper was about. Wade started. Because, of course, he did. He spread his hands, and he gave the family his version, smooth as ever, that I'd been under a lot of strain, that caregiving breaks people, that he'd only ever tried to lift the financial burden off Della's shoulders, that the house needed to be put to work for Mom's care, that lawyers and reports were a tragic overreaction, that we could still fix this quietly if everyone just calmed down. Aunt Carolyn was nodding. He was winning the room, the way he'd won every room since he was 4. I let him finish. Sandra had taught me that. Let the animal come to you. Then I put the folder on the table, and I opened it. And I did not argue, because I wasn't there to argue. I was there to inform. I gave it to them in numbered statements, flat as a vet report, and I am going to give it to you the same way. 1. I said, on the 4th of March, the day this power of attorney says Mom signed it. Mom was in respite care at St. Agnes, behind a locked door, 11 miles from that notary's office. I laid down the admission, the discharge, the photograph, with the cardinal. She could not have signed this. Here she is that afternoon. The room got quiet. Aunt Carolyn picked up the photograph. 2. The notary who certified she was present and competent is Cyrus Tubb. I looked at Brooke when I said the name, and her face didn't move, which told me everything. His notary commission expired on the 28th of February. He stamped this on the 4th of March with a seal that was already dead. That makes this notarization void. I laid down the commission printout next to the stamp. 3. Using that void power, on the 22nd of March, Wade took out a $96,000 credit line against this house. The house Mom and Dad paid off 20 years ago. I laid down the recorded lien. 4. He drew $60,000 off it. $32,000 went to the car wash franchise that is underwater. $18,000 went to a brokerage account and was gone in 6 weeks on options trades. $10,000 came out as cashier's checks. I laid down the draw history and my tracing. I can show you each transfer. None of it went to Mom. Wade started to speak. I didn't raise my voice. I just kept going. Because the next number was the one I'd saved. 5. In February, before any of this, $14,000 was taken out of Mom's certificate of deposit, her funeral money, the money she set aside so we wouldn't have to worry. I laid down the cash out. Aunt Carolyn's hand went to her mouth. 6. And here I set down the guardianship order and turned it so Aunt Carolyn could read the underlined line herself. A judge has already reviewed all of this and found the power of attorney to be, and I am quoting the order, of no force or effect. As of last week, I am Mom's legal guardian and conservator. Wade has no authority over her or her money. The court already decided this. I am only telling you so you hear it from me, instead of from a rumor. The salesman's weather broke. I watched it go out of his face, like a porch light at dawn. Della, he said, and his voice had a new thing in it, a thin thing. You don't understand the pressure I was under. The business was, I do understand it, I said. And I set down the last page, tab 7. Brooks. Handwriting. Don't say. Gambling to Carolyn. I didn't read it out, loud dramatically. I just turned it around and let Aunt Carolyn read it in Brooks' own hand. The word, gambling. The bullet points. The plan. List house with Tara. Get Della out by the first. Cash. The certificate first. Brooke stood up. That was the first time she moved. We're leaving, she said. You can, I said. The folder stays. There is a copy with my attorney and a copy with the Sheriff's Economic Crimes Unit. I am not asking any of you for anything. I am not screaming. I just wasn't going to let his story be the family story. Now you've seen mine. It is the one with the documents. And then my mother, who hadn't followed a word of it, who lived in a country none of us could visit anymore, looked over from her chair at the noise and the standing up. And she patted the arm of the recliner. And she said, the thing she said every evening of her fading life, leave the light on. Leave the light on. Nobody in that room could speak. Aunt Carolyn was crying into Brooks' checklist. Wade was gray. And I got up. I didn't answer Wade. I didn't answer Brooke. I went and I turned on the porch light at 4 p.m. for my mother, because she asked. And because some part of me wanted it burning while the two of them walked out under it, they left. Wade didn't slide anything across the table. This time, he had nothing left to slide. Stay with me, because the consequences are still landing. And a verdict you can't see isn't a verdict. I promised you'd feel them. Here is what happened. In the flat order it happened. Over the months that followed, the first thing, the bank, with Priya's fraud finding in writing, declared the credit line fraudulently, originated on a void instrument. They rescinded it. They released the lien on the house. The paper Wade slid across my table. The house is an asset now, was reversed by the institution that made the loan. In writing. On letterhead, the $96,000 shadow over 20 Coralbian Lane was gone, and the $60,000 he'd actually drawn didn't vanish into thin air. It became Wade's. Personally. The real signer. The bank pursued him for every dollar of it, because he was the only flesh and blood human who'd actually put a hand to that loan, the debt he tried to hang on a paid-off house, and an unknowing old woman landed back on the exact man who created it. Huh. Read that twice. Heis. He spent months engineering a way to make the house owe $96,000. And when the dust cleared, the only person who owed anything was him. The second thing, the Secretary of State opened an administrative case on Cyrus Tubb for notarizing with an expired commission and certifying the presence of a person who was provably elsewhere. His commission was revoked permanently, and he was referred for prosecution. The dead stamp that made the whole scheme possible became the thread that hanged it. Brooks free. No charge cousin turned out to be the single most expensive favor my brother ever accepted. The third thing, and the one that mattered most. The prosecutor charged Wade financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, forgery, and, because of a page in Brooke's handwriting, conspiracy. His lawyer did what good lawyers do, and it ended in a plea rather than a trial, which was fine by me. I didn't need a spectacle. I needed it true and on the record forever. Wade pleaded to felony exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The franchise money and the brokerage money were mostly gone, but the court ordered full restitution of what could be ordered, including the $14,000 from our mother's certificate of deposit. Her funeral money, restored to her conservatorship estate, where I now controlled it. The court garnished his wages. To do it, let me give you the number, because numbers are the only honest things I know how to leave you with. $14,000, repaid at $350 a month, is 40 months. $350, 40 times, is $14,000. So for 40 months, 3 years and 4 months. On the first of every month, a deposit arrives in my mother's account, automatically, no contact required. No charm possible. Just an amount of money leaving my brother's paycheck and returning to the woman he stole it from every first of the month. For 40 months. There is a kind of justice that doesn't roar. It just shows up on the first, quietly, the way I used to. He also got supervised probation and a court-ordered condition I asked Sandra to push for, and the judge agreed to. Gambling cessation counseling, because the $18,000 on the screen told me the franchise wasn't the disease. It was the symptom. And a man who'll bet his mother's house will find another house if nobody makes him look at the thing in the mirror. I didn't ask for that to punish him. I asked for it because somewhere under the salesman's weather was the 4-year-old who could make our mother laugh. And I am not made of stone. Even now, Brooke wasn't charged in the end. The prosecutor decided the handwriting proved intent, but not the hands-on act. And they took the plea they could get, but that page is in the court file. Her involvement is on the record. In her own writing, forever. Some sentences you serve aren't handed down by a judge. Some you just carry in a public drawer, where anyone who knows how to read a drawer can find them. Wade reacted the way they always react. The verdict didn't make him sorry. It made him loud. For weeks the voicemails came. And they followed the exact arc. I'd watched 100 fraudsters follow when the file closes on them. First fury. You destroyed this family. I hope you are happy. Then grief with no apology in it. Mom would be heartbroken. You did this to Mom. Then the oily return of the charm, the reach for the old setting that used to work. Della, come on. It is me. We can fix this. Then, last, the thing under all of it. The only honest thing he ever sent me, a text at 2 a.m. that just said, "You were always the one she'd have picked anyway." I answered exactly one of his messages. The angry one about destroying the family. I'd thought a long time about what to say, and in the end I gave him back his own words, because that is the only language he ever fully understood. He'd told me, sliding the eviction across the table. It is just paperwork, Della. So I texted him back 4 words. It was just paperwork. That is why it was so easy to prove. Then I blocked the number, not in anger. Just the way you turn off a light in a room. You finished cleaning. I told you I'd refuse the cheap reunion, and I will, because you deserve a true ending instead of a comfortable one. We did not all gather at a holiday and weep and forgive and pass the potatoes. That is not what happened. What happened was smaller and realer. I did not get my brother back. I don't expect to. We are not estranged with a door cracked. We are just two people who used to be a family. And one of us proved what he'd do to the other. When the math got hard, you can forgive a man and still not hand him the keys again. I've made my peace with the difference. I did get some things back, and I want to name them, because they're the whole point. I got the house. The lien is gone, the title clean, recorded in my mother's name with me as her conservator. And it will pass to her grandchildren one day exactly the way our parents meant. Paid for. Theirs. A thing nobody can take because somebody finally read the drawer. I got Aunt Carolyn back. And this is the one warm, earned thing I'll let myself have. She came to the house 2 weeks after the meeting. By herself, no casserole this time. And she sat at the table, and she took both my hands and she said, I called you selfish, in your own kitchen, while you were keeping my sister alive. She couldn't get further than that. I told her I knew she'd believed Wade because everyone always believed Wade, and that it wasn't her fault she'd never been shown the documents. She comes every Sunday. Now, she sits with Mom and reads her the church bulletin and turns on the porch light at dusk without being asked, because I told her once what it meant, and now it is hers too. And I got Jonah, Wade and Brooke's son, 8 years old, my nephew, who didn't do a single thing wrong and lost a uncle's house worth of family in a season he was too young to understand. I won't make Jonah pay for his parents. He comes to the house every other Saturday. The arrangement is careful, and the lawyers wrote it down. Because in this family I write everything down now. And he sits with his great-grandmother and helps me feed her oatmeal at the same table where all of it happened. And he doesn't know yet that the table has a history. And I hope he never has to. He just knows that on Saturdays, Aunt Della's house has a light on for him. Margie came to see Mom near the end of all this. She held my wrist again, the way she had in that church basement, and she looked at the folder still sitting on my counter. I never quite put it away, and she said, I told you, the ones who carry the weight. I said, you did. She said, now put the folder in a drawer. Baby, you proved it. You don't have to hold it open anymore. So I did. I put the green notebook with it. 7 years of doses and meals and falls. Every day I showed up in a drawer where it belongs. Not as evidence anymore, as a record of a love nobody can dispute. Because it is all in dates, and the dates are all true. My mother died in the spring, quietly, in the house, in the chair by the window where she liked to watch the live oaks move. I was holding her hand. The porch light was on. I'd turned it on at dusk out of 7 years of habit before I even understood. The day was the day. At the very end, she had a clear moment, the kind the disease grants, like a cruelty or a gift. You never know which. And she looked at me, not at her dead sister, at me. And she said, there is my good girl. You left the light on. And then she was gone, and I sat with her until the light outside changed. And I did not cry, because I'd already cried my once, months before, in a parking lot, over the words of no force or effect. And I think some part of me had been saving the calm for her. Here is what I understand now. And then, I'll let you go. I used to think the porch light was a sad little habit. A thing I did for a fading woman who believed a lit porch meant her people were coming home. I had it backwards the whole time. The light was never the lie. The light was the truth. It meant somebody stayed every dusk for 7 years, in a house everyone else only visited. One person turned on a light and waited, and did the ugly work, and read the drawer, and held the line, and turned out to be the one she'd have picked anyway. Wade thought the house was the asset. He was reading the wrong document. The asset was always the person at the table at 6 in the morning, with the oatmeal and the green notebook, and the steady hands. You can't put a lien on that. He spent $96,000 learning it, and it really was just paperwork. He was right about that. In the end, it was just paperwork. The respite log, the dead stamp, the recorded lien, the draw history. A checklist in his wife's own hand. An order with 7 small words in it. Just paperwork. Which is exactly why, once somebody finally sat down and read it, it gave him nowhere to hide. I do the same work. I always did. I read documents for a living, and I find the place people hope you'll skip. I just do it now without circles under my eyes, in a paid-for house, with a light I turn on every dusk for a woman who isn't there to need it anymore. And for an aunt who comes Sundays, and a nephew who comes Saturdays. And for me, mostly now. For me, if you've ever been the one who stayed, the one they called selfish, for finally protecting what you built and who you loved, then I want you to do one thing before you go. Tonight, wherever you are, leave a light on. For the version of you that did the ugly work, nobody else would. She earned it. That is my story. Has one paper slid across a kitchen table, one house someone tried to turn into a number, and a long, quiet winter of learning that the people closest to you are the ones who can reach deepest into your drawer, and that the only thing that beats a man who breaks the rules is becoming the rules. Thank you for staying with me to the end. If this reminded you that your boundaries are worth protecting even when someone calls you selfish for having them, leave that one word below. Stayed. So the next person who is still carrying the weight scrolls down and sees they're not alone in the room. Then, go turn on your light. I'll see you in the next one.